Remember sitting in your grandparents' car surrounded by mysterious knobs, tiny levers, and glowing gauges you were afraid to touch? Modern dashboards have wiped all of that away. But those analog wonderlands were something special. Remember the last time you sat in a brand new car and just looked at the dashboard? It's all touchscreens and minimalist design now, maybe a couple of buttons if you're lucky. But there was a time when car dashboards were absolutely loaded with knobs, switches, cranks, and little chrome details that each told you something about the era they came from. From the 1950s through the 90s, your dashboard wasn't just functional. It was a statement. It reflected the culture, the technology, and honestly, the habits of an entire generation. Well, today, we're counting down 20 old dashboard features that have completely faded into history. Some of these you'll remember instantly. Others might surprise you. And a few of them, well, you might not believe were ever real in the first place. If you enjoy this kind of nostalgic deep dive, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. All right, let's get into it. Number 20, the cigarette lighter. If you grew up anywhere near a car built before the 2000s, you know exactly what this thing looked like. A small cylindrical knob sitting right there in the center of your dashboard. You'd push it in, wait about 10 seconds, and then it would pop back out with that coil glowing bright orange, ready to light your cigarette. That was it. That was its entire purpose. It wasn't designed to charge your phone or power a portable vacuum. It existed because smoking behind the wheel was as normal as turning on the radio. In the 1960s, General Motors alone was producing over 5 million cars per year, and every single one of them came equipped with a cigarette lighter as standard equipment. Not optional, standard. By the mid-2000s, automakers started quietly phasing them out, and by 2015, most manufacturers had replaced that familiar round socket with a USB charging port. The cigarette lighter became a relic almost overnight. But here's the thing, if you were a kid in the 80s or 90s, you probably remember the temptation. That glowing orange coil was basically a dare. How many of you actually touched it? Be honest. Or drop a comment below if you ever burned your finger on that thing, because you were definitely not alone. Number 19, built-in ashtrays. Now the cigarette lighter needed a companion, and that companion was the ashtray. And cars didn't just have one. They had them everywhere. Front dash, rear seat armrests, door panels. Some luxury models had ashtrays built into every possible surface, like the designers assumed everyone in the vehicle would be chain-smoking simultaneously. And honestly, back then, they probably were. These weren't cheap little afterthoughts either. In many cars from the 50s and 60s, the ashtrays featured elegant chrome designs with satisfying spring-loaded lids that clicked open and shut with a precision that felt almost luxurious. They were part of the car's interior identity. But as smoking rates declined through the 80s and 90s and public health awareness grew, automakers started removing them one by one. Some replaced them with small storage compartments or coin holders. Others just sealed up the space entirely. Today, finding a built-in ashtray in a new car is virtually impossible unless you're ordering some kind of specialty option package. Number 18, vent window cranks. Here's one that a lot of younger folks have never even heard of. Before air conditioning became a standard feature in most vehicles, cars had these small triangular windows at the front of each door. They were called vent windows or wing windows, and they had their own little crank or latch that let you pivot them open at an angle. The genius of the design was simple. When you were driving, the angled glass would scoop air from outside and direct it right into the cabin. It was ventilation, without rolling down your entire window and dealing with all that wind noise and chaos. They were incredibly effective too, especially at lower speeds around town. But once air conditioning became affordable and widespread through the 70s and 80s, vent windows started disappearing. Automakers realized they could simplify door construction, reduce costs, and improve aerodynamics by eliminating them altogether. By the early 90s, they were essentially gone from passenger cars completely. It's funny how three features so deeply connected to everyday driving just vanished within a generation. Smoking culture faded, air conditioning took over, and the dashboard lost some of its most familiar faces forever. Then, from the smoking accessories that defined an era, we moved to the gauges and instruments that once gave drivers a real-time connection to their engines. Number 17. Ammeter gauge. Here's something that might blow your mind if you've only ever driven modern cars. There was a time when your dashboard actually told you what was happening inside your engine. Not with a little cartoon icon that lights up when something's already gone wrong, but with real, honest-to-goodness gauges that moved in real time. And the ammeter was one of the most important ones. The ammeter gauge measured the flow of electrical current in your car's charging system. It had a needle that swung between charge and discharge, and if you knew how to read it, you could diagnose alternator problems before they left you stranded on the side of the road. You'd start the car, watch the needle swing to the charge side, and you knew everything was working. If that needle started drifting toward discharge while you were driving, you had a heads up that your alternator was failing. That's not a warning light telling you something's already broken. That's real-time information giving you a chance to do something about it. In 1972, a base model Chevrolet Nova came standard with a full gauge package that included an ammeter right there on the instrument cluster. A base model, not the sport package, not the deluxe trim, the standard car. Manufacturers actually trusted everyday drivers with real information about their vehicles. Number 16, oil pressure gauge. Now this one really gets old school car guys fired up. The dedicated oil pressure gauge was a needle gauge that showed you the exact PSI of oil pressure running through your engine at any given moment. You could watch it climb when you revved the engine and settle at idle. You learned what was normal for your car, and if those numbers started dropping, you knew something was changing before any real damage occurred. It was like having a stethoscope on your engine's heart. Today, what do most cars give you? A little oil can icon that lights up red. And here's the cruel irony. By the time that light comes on, your oil pressure has already dropped to a dangerously low level. You might have seconds before serious engine damage occurs. The old gauge gave you minutes, sometimes hours of advance warning. That's why mechanics started calling those replacement warning lights idiot lights, because they assumed the driver couldn't handle actual information. Number 15. Standalone voltmeter. The voltmeter was your window into the electrical soul of your car. It sat right there on the dash, continuously monitoring the voltage in your electrical system, and it told you everything you needed to know about your battery's health and whether your charging system was doing its job. A healthy system would show somewhere around 13.5 to 14.5 volts while running. If you saw that number dropping below 12, you knew your battery was draining. If it spiked above 15, your voltage regulator might be going bad. It was constant, passive monitoring that required nothing from you except an occasional glance. And the beautiful thing was, you developed an intuition for it. You'd glance down and just know if something felt off. Modern cars buried this information deep in digital submenus that most drivers will never find. Number 14, prominent temperature gauge. And then there was the big one, the engine temperature gauge. This wasn't some tiny sliver of a display tucked in a corner. On older cars, this was a large, clearly readable gauge right in the center of your instrument cluster, showing you the exact temperature of your engine coolant. You could watch it climb from cold to operating temperature every single morning. You knew when your thermostat opened because you'd see that needle dip slightly. You understood your engine's rhythm. Now most modern cars have replaced this with a simple blue light that turns off when the engine warms up, and a red light that screams at you when you're already overheating. The shift from these analog gauges to warning lights represents something bigger than just dashboard design. It's a whole philosophy change. Automakers decided that computers should manage the information and drivers should just drive. But something was lost in that transition. Do you prefer knowing exactly what your engine is doing with real gauges, or are you fine with warning lights? Let us know in the comments. From the gauges that kept drivers informed, let's move to the manual controls that put drivers physically in charge of their car's mechanical systems. Number 13, choke knob. Here's something that would absolutely baffle most drivers today. Imagine getting into your car on a freezing January morning, and before you even turn the key, you have to reach down to the dashboard and pull out a little knob. That knob was the choke, and it was one of the most important controls on any car with a carburetor. What it did was restrict airflow into the engine, creating a richer fuel mixture that made cold starts possible. Without it, your engine would cough, sputter, and refuse to cooperate. The thing is, operating the choke wasn't just a simple pull-and-forget situation. You had to use genuine judgment. Pull it out too far, and you'd flood the engine with fuel. Don't pull it out enough, and the car wouldn't start at all. And here's the part that tripped up so many people. Once the engine warmed up, you had to remember to push the choke back in. Or forget that step and you were running way too rich, wasting gas, fouling your spark plugs, and potentially stalling out at the worst possible moment. By the 1980s, automatic chokes had largely taken over, and then electronic fuel injection came along and eliminated the need for a choke entirely. Number 12, hand throttle. Now closely related to the choke was another dashboard control that most modern drivers have never even heard of, the hand throttle. This was essentially a manual idle speed control, a small lever or knob on the dashboard that let you set the engine's RPM without touching the gas pedal. Why would you need that? Well, think about it. In the days before sophisticated engine management systems, cars needed to warm up properly before you drove them. The hand throttle let you bump up the idle speed while the engine warmed, keeping it running smoothly without sitting there holding your foot on the accelerator. It was also incredibly useful if you were running accessories off the engine while parked, like a power takeoff on a farm truck, or even just keeping the heater blowing strong on a bitter cold night. The hand throttle quietly disappeared as automatic idle control systems became standard. Number 11, manual headlight dimmer switch. Okay, if you ever drove a car with a floor-mounted headlight dimmer switch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That satisfying click under your left foot. This was a small button mounted on the floorboard, usually just to the left of where the dead pedal would be, and you'd stomp on it to toggle between high beams and low beams. It was standard on virtually every American car from the 1920s all the way through the late 1980s. That's over 60 years of drivers instinctively tapping their left foot to dim their headlights. Ford was actually one of the last major manufacturers to finally move the dimmer to the steering column stalk, and that didn't happen until 1992. And here's the funny thing. Older drivers who spent decades using that floor switch still instinctively stomp at the floorboard when they want to switch to high beams. Muscle memory is a powerful thing. Number 10, pull-out headlight switch. And speaking of headlights, let's talk about how you actually turned them on in the first place. Before automatic headlights and simple dashboard toggles, there was the pull-out headlight switch. This was a round knob on the dashboard that you physically pulled outward to activate your headlights. Pull it out one click for parking lights. Pull it all the way out for full headlights. And here's the clever part. Most of these switches also had a twist function built right into the knob. You'd rotate it to dim or brighten your dashboard instrument lights. Two functions in one beautifully simple mechanical control. There was something genuinely tactile and satisfying about that pull. You felt connected to the car in a way that flipping a tiny switch just doesn't replicate. But as cars moved toward more standardized controls and automatic lighting systems, the pull-out switch faded away. Now that we've covered the controls drivers physically operated, let's look at the convenience features and comfort accessories that once made dashboards truly unique. Number 9. Dedicated map light switches. Here's something that seems so simple you might wonder why it even makes this list. But think about it. Before GPS, before smartphones, before any kind of digital navigation, the only way to figure out where you were going after dark was to unfold an actual paper map and try to read it while someone else was driving. And that meant you needed light. Not the dome light, because that would blind the driver and create a dangerous glare on the windshield. You needed a focused directional light just for the passenger side. That's exactly what dedicated map light toggle switches provided. These were individual switches, usually mounted right on the dashboard or the headliner edge, that controlled small focused lamps aimed at the passenger's lap area. They were essential. Families on road trips depended on them. The passenger was literally the navigation system, and the map light was their power source. Once GPS navigation arrived and paper maps became decorative souvenirs, the dedicated map light switch quietly disappeared. Number 8. Factory-installed tissue dispenser. This one always gets people. Yes, automakers actually built tissue dispensers directly into dashboards. We're talking factory-installed, not some aftermarket accessory you'd clip onto your visor. During the 1950s and 60s, luxury car manufacturers decided that a properly appointed automobile should anticipate every possible need of its occupants, and apparently that included runny noses. These dispensers were integrated into the dashboard or tucked into the glove box area with a spring-loaded mechanism that would pop out a fresh tissue with a satisfying little pull. Cadillac offered them. Lincoln offered them. Several other premium brands followed suit. It was part of this broader philosophy that your car should feel like your living room, complete with all the little comforts you'd expect at home. But as dashboard real estate became more valuable and interior design shifted toward minimalism and technology, the humble tissue dispenser got evicted. Number 7. Under-dash highway hi-fi record player. Okay, this is the one that blows people's minds. In 1956, Chrysler introduced something called the Highway Hi-Fi, and it was exactly what it sounds like, a record player, mounted under your dashboard. For playing vinyl while you drove. Chrysler partnered with Columbia Records to create this system, which played special 7-inch records at 16 and 2/3 RPM, a speed specifically designed for this device. Columbia even produced an entire catalog of titles for it. The ambition was incredible. The execution, however, had one fatal flaw that should have been obvious to everyone involved. Roads have bumps, and record players have needles. Every pothole, every rough patch of highway, every railroad crossing sent that needle skipping across the vinyl like a stone across a pond. The system was discontinued by 1959 after just 3 years. Today, working highway hi-fi units are among the most collectible pieces of automotive history, with functional examples selling for over $2,000. Number 6. Dashboard-mounted bench seat adjustment lever. Before bucket seats took over the automotive world, most cars had bench seats up front, one continuous seat stretching from door to door, and to adjust that seat's position, you didn't reach down between your legs for a lever on the seat rail like you would today. Instead, many cars had the adjustment mechanism mounted right on the lower dashboard. It was usually a lever or a crank that you'd pull or turn, and the entire bench seat would slide forward or backward on its tracks. This made mechanical sense because the dashboard-mounted position gave you better leverage and was easier to reach than fumbling around underneath the seat. When bucket seats became standard through the 1970s and 80s, each seat got its own individual adjustment mechanism mounted on the seat itself, and the dashboard lever became unnecessary. It's one of those features that vanished not because it failed, but because the entire concept it served simply ceased to exist. From comfort accessories that tried too hard, we moved to the safety and signaling features that once had a permanent home on every dashboard. Number 5. Dashboard-mounted ignition switch. Here's something that might surprise younger drivers. There was a time when you didn't stick your key into the steering column to start your car. You stuck it right into the dashboard. Right there on the face of the instrument panel, usually somewhere near the center or just to the right of the steering wheel, was a simple key slot. You'd slide your key in, give it a twist, and the engine would fire up. No steering column involved whatsoever. This was standard practice through the 1950s and well into the 1960s. But car theft was becoming a massive problem by the late 1960s, and General Motors came up with a solution that would change every car built after it. In 1969, GM introduced the locking steering column, which moved the ignition switch from the dashboard to the column itself. When you removed the key, the steering wheel locked in place, making it significantly harder to steal the car. Every other manufacturer followed suit within just a few years. And now, of course, push-button start systems mean many drivers never insert a key anywhere at all. Number 4. Wing window defogger knob. Now this one requires you to remember a feature that itself has disappeared. Wing windows. Those small triangular vent windows at the front corners of your door glass that you could pivot open to direct air into the cabin. Well, if you had wing windows, you also had a dedicated knob on your dashboard specifically designed to direct warm air toward them. The wing window defogger knob was its own separate control, usually a small round dial or pull knob, nestled among the other climate controls. Its entire purpose was to keep those little triangular panes clear of fog and frost. And it actually mattered quite a bit, because wing windows were positioned right in your line of sight when checking mirrors or looking at cross traffic. The system worked through small dedicated vents in the dashboard that aimed heated air right at those tiny windows. It was simple, it was mechanical, and it did exactly one job. But when automakers started eliminating wing windows in the 1970s and 80s, the defogger knob went with them. It's a feature that disappeared not because it failed, but because the thing it was designed to support simply ceased to exist. Number 3. Cable-driven mechanical speedometer. Remember that bouncing speedometer needle that could never quite settle on one number? That little wobble, that constant dance between 53 and 57 when you were pretty sure you were doing 55. That was the cable-driven speedometer, and it was one of the longest surviving mechanical dashboard features in automotive history, and lasting from the early 1900s all the way into the mid-2000s in some vehicles. The system was elegantly simple. A flexible cable spun inside a protective housing directly driven by the transmission output shaft. That spinning cable turned a magnet inside the speedometer head, which dragged a metal cup through eddy currents to move the needle. Pure physics. No electronics, no sensors, no computer processing. And the sounds it made were unforgettable. At low speeds, you'd hear that characteristic clicking or ticking coming from behind the instrument cluster. When the cable started wearing out, it produced a distinctive squealing noise that any mechanic could diagnose in about 3 seconds flat. General Motors finally phased out the last cable speedometers in their trucks around 2005, marking the end of an era that had lasted roughly a century. Number 2, the dashboard trunk release lever. Now this one might seem simple, but stay with me because there's something genuinely beautiful about it. Before electronic buttons and key fob remotes took over, most cars had a small lever or pull handle mounted somewhere on the dashboard or down near the driver's side kick panel. You'd reach down, give it a firm pull, and you'd actually feel the trunk pop open through a physical cable that ran the entire length of the car. No electronics, no motors, just a steel cable connecting your hand directly to a latch at the back of your vehicle. When you pulled that lever, you felt resistance. You felt the mechanism working. There was a satisfying little thunk as the trunk latch released. It was mechanical. It was immediate. And it never failed because your battery died. A cable-operated trunk release worked every single time, regardless of whether your electrical system was having a bad day. The transition to electronic trunk buttons happened gradually through the 90s and into the 2000s. Key fob remotes made it even easier to open your trunk from across a parking lot, which admittedly is convenient. But something was lost in that trade, that physical connection, that direct link between your hand and a mechanical function happening 10 feet behind you. It represented a philosophy of car design where the driver was physically tethered to every part of the machine. Number 1. The fully analog instrument cluster. And here we are. Number 1. The big one. The feature that arguably defined what a dashboard even was for nearly a century. On the fully analog instrument cluster, we're talking about the complete package here. Physical needle gauges sweeping across printed number scales, chrome trim rings catching the light, backlit dials glowing softly at night, in greens or ambers or reds, depending on the make. This wasn't just instrumentation, this was art. Every automaker had their own signature look. Porsche had their iconic 5-round dials. BMW had their angled driver-centric cluster tilted toward whoever was behind the wheel. Mercedes had those elegant horizontal sweeping gauges that felt like they belonged in a luxury timepiece. And then there was what many consider the most beautiful analog cluster ever designed, the 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. A deeply hooded panel with 5 round gauges, each featuring a delicate needle and chrome bezel. All backlit in a soft green glow that made the cockpit feel like something from a fighter jet. These clusters told you everything you needed to know at a glance: speed, engine temperature, fuel level, oil pressure, battery voltage, and they did it with physical needles that moved with a graceful sweep that somehow made the information feel more real, more trustworthy than any digital readout ever could. When your tachometer needle climbed toward redline, you didn't just see a number changing. You watched that needle arc upward with increasing urgency, and something in your gut responded to that visual in a way that a screen simply cannot replicate. Today, companies like Genesis and Mercedes use 48-inch curved OLED screens that can display literally any gauge design digitally. And here's the beautiful irony. The most popular digital gauge theme that customers choose is one designed to look exactly like classic analog dials. We spent decades and billions of dollars developing technology to eliminate physical gauges, and then we immediately used that technology to recreate the appearance of what we just threw away. That's not progress being nostalgic. That's proof that something genuinely valuable was lost. And with that, we've journeyed through 20 pieces of automotive history that once lived right in front of every driver. Let's wrap this up. So we've gone through 20 features now, and before we finish, I want to take a moment to talk about why any of this actually matters. Because it's easy to dismiss all of this as just nostalgia, right? Just old people missing old things. But I think it goes deeper than that. These 20 features represent a complete philosophy of automotive design, a philosophy built on physical connection, on tactile feedback, on the idea that driving was something you did with your hands and your senses, not just your fingertips on a glass screen. Old dashboards required you to be a participant in the mechanical experience. You weren't just a passenger being ferried around by software. You were engaged. You felt the engine through the choke. You read the oil pressure gauge and actually understood what your car was telling you. You reached for a knob and knew exactly what it would do without ever taking your eyes off the road. The shift to digital has given us incredible capabilities: navigation, real-time diagnostics, adaptive systems that would have seemed like science fiction in 1985. Nobody's arguing against progress, but what we lost in that transition was character, individuality, soul, if you want to get poetic about it. Walk into any dealership today and sit in 5 different cars from 5 different manufacturers. The interiors are shockingly similar. Big screen in the middle, maybe a second screen. Minimal buttons, clean lines. It's all very sleek, very modern, and very identical. The dashboard used to be the face of a car's personality. A Cadillac dashboard looked nothing like a Volkswagen dashboard, and both looked nothing like a Corvette's. Now they're all variations of the same tablet bolted to a console, and I'm not the only one saying this. A 2023 survey by JD Power found that the #1 complaint among new car buyers was overly complicated infotainment systems and the removal of physical buttons and controls. People are literally telling manufacturers they want some of this stuff back, and some manufacturers are listening. Toyota actually brought back physical climate control knobs in certain 2024 models after customers pushed back against all touchscreen interfaces. That's not nostalgia driving that decision. That's usability. And then there's the high end of the market. Singer Vehicle Design builds Restomod Porsches that cost over $500,000. And what do they include? Fully analog instrument clusters, beautiful mechanical gauges. Because their clients, people who can afford literally anything, specifically demand the tactile experience. So here's what we want to know. Which of these 20 dashboard features do you miss the most? And which car did you drive that had the best old-school dashboard? We genuinely want to hear your stories in the comment section below. Tell us about your first car, your dad's truck, your grandmother's sedan, whatever it is. Those stories are gold. If you enjoyed this trip through automotive nostalgia, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got plenty more coming. We're diving deeper into forgotten car culture, retro features, and the vehicles that shaped how we all grew up. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of it, and we'll see you in the next one.